My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream.
Considered by many to be one of the most influential leaders of the 20th century, Martin Luther King Jr. was America's most prominent civil rights activist. His leadership was instrumental in ending legal apartheid and empowering the African American community. He advocated peaceful resistance as a means of bringing about political change. A gifted orator, his I Have a Dream speech, delivered on August 28, 1963 at the March on Washington, is now famous across the world.
One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929 and named Michael Luther King Jr., but later he changed his name to Martin. He came from a family of pastors and he himself served as a co-pastor until his death. He attended segregated public schools in Georgia, graduating from high school at 15. He received a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1948 from Morehouse College, a distinguished Negro institution of Atlanta. He enrolled in graduate studies at Boston University, receiving his doctorate degree in 1955. In Boston, he met and married Coretta Scott and went on to have 2 sons and 2 daughters. In 1954, Martin Luther King became pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Always a strong worker for civil rights for members of his race, King was, by this time, a member of the Executive Committee of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. In 1955, he led a non-violent movement to end segregation on buses. The boycott lasted 382 days. On December 21, 1956, the Supreme Court of the United States declared unconstitutional the laws requiring segregation on buses. Arrested and abused during the boycott, he emerged as the biggest leader of colored people. In 1957, he was elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization for the now growing civil rights movement. The ideals for this organization he took from Christianity, its operational techniques from M.K. Gandhi. Between 1957 and 1968, King traveled over 6 million miles and spoke over 2,500 times, appearing wherever there was injustice, protest, and action. During this time, he also led a massive protest in Birmingham, Alabama, that caught the attention of the entire world. It was at this time that he wrote his letter from a Birmingham jail, a manifesto of the Negro Revolution. He planned the campaigns in Alabama for the registration of Negroes as voters and directed the peaceful march on Washington, D.C. of 250,000 people. It was here that he delivered I Have a Dream speech. During this time, he was arrested over 20 times, assaulted 4 times, awarded 5 honorary degrees, and named Man of the Year by Times magazine. He became not only the biggest leader of Black Americans, but also a world figure. At the age of 35, Martin Luther King Jr. became the youngest man to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. On the evening of April 4, 1968, at the age of 39, while standing on the balcony of his motel room in Memphis, Tennessee, where he was to lead a protest march for striking garbage workers, he was assassinated. Though Martin Luther King Jr. was one of its biggest leaders, the civil rights movement began much earlier. Even during the American Revolution in the late 18th century, efforts were on to eliminate racial injustice and end slavery. After the Civil War, the passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments established a legal foundation for the political equality of African Americans. Despite the abolition of slavery and legal gains for African Americans, racial segregation continued. This was known as the Jim Crow segregation, which meant Southern blacks were continuing to live in poverty and inequality, with white supremacists denying them their hard-won political rights and freedom. The civil rights movement continued in the 20th century as promises of emancipation remained unfulfilled. In the Second World War, African Americans fought in a segregated military. But after fighting for the democracy of other countries, African American soldiers returned to the United States to fight for their own rights. The civil rights movement was carried out through different strategies and approaches, including legal action, nonviolent civil disobedience, and black militancy. One of the earliest approaches was taking the battle to the courts. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People under Martin Luther King Jr. initiated lawsuits against the Jim Crow segregation in the South. The court ruled that separate facilities were inherently unequal and declared segregation in public education to be unconstitutional. But authorities in the South actively resisted court orders to desegregate. Consequently, some leaders of the civil rights movement turned to direct action and non-violent civil disobedience. It was here that Luther led the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 after Rosa Parks refused to vacate her seat on the bus for a white person. Religious groups such as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, student organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and labor unions such as the American Federation of Labor all participated in massive protests to raise awareness. Mass direct action was highly effective, particularly due to widespread news media coverage of non-violent protesters being harassed and beaten by law enforcement officers. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was the largest civil rights protest in US history and contributed to the implementation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The civil rights movement racked up many notable victories, from the dismantling of the Jim Crow segregation in the South to the passage of federal legislation outlawing racial discrimination to the widespread awareness of the African American cultural heritage. In 2008, Barack Obama became the nation's first African American president, an indication of just how far the struggle for equality has come. This was all for this video. Thank you for watching.
If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible,